Hi guys, my name is JD Connor, and I'm no historian or literary scholar, but I am the first person in history to show, prove, and demonstrate how to extract the hidden solution to every other version of Humpty Dumpty known to the literary world.
Starting with this one in 1797. This handwritten version was submitted in 1803. This I forgot how to spell version from 1810, and this perfectly grim and dark period piece from 1842. Of these 5 Humpty Dumpty poems, spanning over 200 years, only these 4 poems retell a pivotal moment during the English Civil War, in which the Cavaliers, men loyal to the tyrannical King Charles I, were ambushed by the Roundheads, men fed up with heavy taxes, and, all that tyranny and stuff. Dude, uncool. This event would kick off when the Royalists took shelter behind the fortified, ancient Roman walls surrounding the town of Colchester, England. There was just one problem with this plan. If your troops are surrounded by a wall, you best believe that your enemies have you surrounded by that same wall. I mean, that's kind of how a siege works. No escape, no problem. That's because this infantry had an ace up its sleeve. Better yet, make that a one-eyed Jack Thompson. This big boy of badassery may not look like a military threat, but he was a seasoned vet with giant balls of iron that he used to decimate his enemies with his cannon affectionately dubbed Humpty Dumpty. And wow, did this duo help inflict damage. The losses the Roundheads suffered in the initial battle were staggering, but the offensive and defensive stand put on by the Cavaliers, legendary. That's great for the guys in the frilly get-ups, but for the ops, this was a massive problem. So, with that failure, the Roundheads waited. And as the weeks went on, they gained more and more troops. And with those troops came bigger and better artillery. Then, on June 14, 1648, the Roundheads unleashed on the town, and especially at the Tower of St. Mary at the walls, where Humpty and One-Eyed Jack were strategically situated. The tower eventually fell, taking Jack and Humpty down with it. 150 years later, a person decided to perfect and publish this earliest known Humpty Dumpty poem. Over the next 50 years, 3 other poets will get in on the creativity and progressively use riddle and rhyme to paint a literary snapshot of time. Well guys, right now, for the first time in 200 years, we're going to solve every single poem in this quadrilogy and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these rhyming word puzzles are actually an ode to Humpty Dumpty, the cannon, and One-Eyed Jack, the gunner. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. We know that for the past few minutes, we've been framing Humpty Dumpty as a cannon, but what is a Humpty Dumpty really? According to Lexico.com, Humpty Dumpty is a fat, rotund person. Harsh, but fair enough. Because English speakers love giving pet names to inanimate things we love. So it makes perfect sense that this king-sized cannon was given that moniker. Okay, this part, especially in the year 2022, seems like we're talking about a wall in the sense of the old Roman wall that once completely surrounded Colchester. But in the late 1700s, in the castle-laden, fortress-abound English countryside, a wall would have been synonymous with a tower wall or some other fortification. Besides, Humpty Dumpty sat on a tower roof just doesn't have quite the same ring to it. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Actually, here's all the evidence we need to support our assertion that Humpty was on a tower when it was destroyed. It didn't have just a fall. It had a great fall, which was either an abnormally brutal fall or a fall from a great distance. I'll have to go with both being true here. 80 men and 80 more. What the is a fourscore? According to Oxford Dictionary, fourscore is actually an archaic way of just saying 80. Counting in, or rounding up or down to the nearest 20 was as common as we now use the power of 10. So that's 80 men and another 80 men, which is 160 men involved. Unless Humpty's mama was a T-Rex, you're going to need some hard-boiled evidence to prove that Humpty Dumpty is an egg that 160 men had the desire or necessity to make where he was before, but still could not. People, this is the earliest known written version of Humpty Dumpty. It inspired all the rest that would come after it. And we can see that it clearly is not about an egg. But if we read this outside of the box, using only the facts stated in the poem and well-established scientific truths like gravity, weight, and mass, we can solve this riddle once and for all. At some time in history, there was something so heavy 160 men could not make it where it was before. Its name was Humpty Dumpty, and apparently the place where it was before was a very strong wall, because it supported the weight of this thing, and it must have been very high, because it had a great fall from it. This poem is, and was originally drafted to be, about Humpty Dumpty, the English Civil War canon. Not convinced yet? Great, because I'm here to blow minds and change history. We have this handwritten submission from a book titled Mother Goose's Melody, published in 1803. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. We're sticking to our assertion that old HD was a large cannon that sat on a fortification, which was very tall and ironically fell itself to cannon fire. This looks familiar. However, there's so much to unpack here. So let's include this line for more context. Now we have an excellent way to find the basic gist of what's going on in this poem. We can do this in the exact way that we did it in part 1. By finding the subject, which is always the protagonists or heroes of the story. Then by finding the corresponding verb followed by the rest of the predicate. Now draw a counterclockwise triangular pattern from subject to verb to predicate. Let's do this Brutus. The king's horses set up again. Look people, I'm no horsist, but I'm just saying, horses cannot put things together or set things up again with their imaginary opposable hoof thumbs. Horses only have horsepower when they have forward movement. The king's horses set up again isn't a logical fallacy because, through the innovation of humans, horses have had their powerful forward momentum converted. This is achieved by a rope and a pulley to lift heavy things upward. So the king's horses actually could set something up again through fashion materials and innovative technologies created by humankind. This poem is almost identical to the original 1797 version, except it gives us 2 new clues that advances the narrative of this quadrilogy. Here it states that Humpty needed to be set up again, which indicates vertical lift. The second clue was placed here, because if this poem is referencing a large cannon named Humpty Dumpty, that sat high on a fortification that eventually fell and was never successfully set up to gain its prior strategical advantage. This line places the king's horses and men as troops desperate to escape the town that they took over by force, to continue to fight for the king and his authoritarian rule. The king's men are the Cavaliers, which means this poem is about Humpty Dumpty, the English Civil War canon, and the side it fought so valiantly for, the Cavaliers. I bet you never thought your kid's nursery rhyme was so deep. Well, the last 2 in this series gets levels deep. Like this version published in the book Gammer Gurton's Garland in 1810. This poem jumps right out of the gate with a radically different angle on the series by telling us exactly why Humpty Dumpty was on that wall in the first place. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall? What is this word? Apparently the word is pronounced
sate,
and it means to satisfy a desire or appetite to the full. I'm not going to attempt to make any jokes about Humpty, the egg, satisfying himself on a wall. But if Humpty Dumpty was a cannon, it would logically enjoy a height advantage. This is due to a wider field of vision coupled with a greater projectile trajectory path. Anyone from military personnel to first-person gamers knows that having a weapon coupled with a height advantage is very satisfying. So is sweet revenge. So this line tells us that Humpty Dumpty was, at least in the poet's eyes, a weapon that enjoyed an extremely advantageous position on a wall, especially when you protected your men at an outstanding ratio of 25-1. If you think this line says Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, say of course. But if you say that this line says Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, say, yeah, I can see that too. In any event, the eyes have it. I know, right? When I first laid eyes on this poem, I said the same thing. Humpty Dumpty, that is, until after dozens of attempts to make sense of this line, I finally paid attention to this tiny line. Only then did it dawn on me that these two-letter I's are the MVP of the poem, scoring 2 major points. Like, one thing they do is 2. This is a cactus, but more than one of these are called
cacti,
and in British English, it is pronounced
cacti,
this is a fungus, but these are
fungi,
and in British English, it is pronounced
fungi.
So, no matter how you pronounce the ending, the author intended these I's to utilize this rarely used effect of English writing pluralization, stating that although Humpty, the canon, enjoyed his position on that tower, 2 fat, rotund characters or more fell from the same tower. Who could one of the other extra chunky figures be? Well, someone had to make Humpty go boom. So the poet is suggesting by body mass alone, it's one-eyed Jack Thompson, the gunner. 80 men and 80 more. We know that a score is equivalent to 20. So that's 20 times 3, which equals 60. Then 60 and 60 is 120. So that's 120 men who try to place only one of the Humpties, as he was before. Pat, I'd like to solve the puzzle. Let's see. This poet is suggesting that there was once a non-living thing named Humpty Dumpty that was satiated, or for a non-sentient thing, performing well at what it was built to do, while it was positioned on a wall. We can derive from the poem itself that this thing didn't have a pulse because it fell from a great distance, and according to the actions of 120 men, it was needed to, and had the ability to, perform the same function it did before it fell. The other Humpty or Humpties, if living, may not have been after the fall, which seems to be the most probable reason why only one of these multiple rotund protagonists were not part of the 120 men's focus in this poem, because it's about Humpty Dumpty, the English Civil War canon, and One-Eyed Jack Thompson, the Cavalier siege engineer or gunner. That last poem was insane, with its use of the letter I to introduce a key character into this quadrilogy. Well, this poem, penned by the legendary James Halliwell Phillips, who has 60 other works under his belt, including The 3 Little Pigs, is not only a literary masterpiece, but according to my research, it has been an unsolved work until now. I'm absolutely certain because someone somewhere would have noted that this poem refers to both Humpty Dumpty, the canon, and One-Eyed Jack in every single line, sometimes simultaneously, and other instances individually. How? Well, my friends, this author must have had a fat wallet to hold all of the poetic license crammed into this poem. Humpty Dumpty lay in a beck. But what the heck is a beck? Apparently, Merriam-Webster defines a beck as a creek, other dictionaries as a stream. So what does a creek have to do with the price of tea in China? While we would love to show you a rainy visual of a sad, disheveled cannon laying in a beckoning of his own reckoning, that specific clip may not exist, and the time to create it, like this video, has ever-increasing costs that directly correlate with the amount of time invested. So please support, like, and subscribe to my channel, because there once was a man from Washington State who spent time on these rhymes so all can relate. It had taken 8 months to finish this mission, through pandemic and job loss, but it took conviction to research and create this huge undertaking that will foster more works that are truly groundbreaking. Ah, that's it, groundbreaking. Humpty Dumpty was an exceptionally large mid-17th century cannon. It didn't weigh a ton, it weighed several tons. Add to that poundage several giant fractures of solid stone falling from a number of stories into raw earth, and you now have a wide area of massive ground surface layer disruption. But what's a beck if it's not wet? I'm from Washington State, and this poem is referencing an event that happened in coastal England. In both of these places, it can rain at any time, and to some, it seems like it's all the time. And there is James Halliwell-Orchard's painting of the scene he imagined, where rescuing Humpty is hopeless and laying in a beck, with all his sinews around his neck. Ah, sinews. I just used that word back in Nevuary. But apparently sinews are a piece of tough fibrous tissue uniting muscle to bone or bone to bone. In essence, a tendon or ligament. Even the example in the dictionary entry references a human. So, it's obvious that this line is referencing a human, and that human did not fare so well after the fall, because the poet is stating that he visualized exposed tendons around someone's neck amongst tons of fallen debris. Not so fast. Sinews, processed from various animal species, especially back in the 17th century, was one of many ways to make some very strong rope. But cannons don't have necks, right? Guess what? They do. It's not, however, the elongated part that visually looks like a biological neck. It's located right behind the flared-out, firing end of the cannon, meaning Humpty Dumpty, the cannon, was left in a deep and wet indention of earth, with pieces of the tower on which it once stood on top of, along with the rope that was unsuccessfully used to retrieve it. And since these two lines are actually one sentence, both of these lines are ingeniously referring to the gruesome twosome. 40 Doctors and 40 writes, doctors, along with nurses and other medical support like hospital staff, fire, and EMS, especially over the course of the pandemic, need no introduction. They have selflessly and tirelessly sacrificed their time, health, and sanity to put us to rights. But what does it actually mean to put something to rights? Merriam-Webster defines put something to rights as to put something back into the normal or proper condition. That sounds exactly like what doctors have been known to strive for historically, except in the case of this person, because, yeah. Now, what are rights? It appears that a right is a worker skilled in the manufacture, especially of wooden objects. Essentially, what we would call a carpenter or a maker, but primarily with wood. In other words, someone who could build something like this. Woodworkers, even today, are indispensable, but during a siege, where your best means to end it is now laying in a beck, rights would have been instrumental in creating the equipment to lift a 20,000-pound cannon back to an advantageous position, like it was before. This line is the only clue in this poem that lets the reader know without a doubt that it's about a human that had succumbed to his injuries and an object that was not able to be put back into its proper and normal condition. When armed with the knowledge that this poem is the fourth and final volume in this quadrilogy, there is absolutely no doubt that the human James Halliwell Phillips is referring to his one-eyed Jack Thompson. And the non-living thing that needed dozens of skilled craftsmen is the titular character, Humpty Dumpty, the English Civil War canon. But who am I to say that these poems, apparently written by 4 different authors, are in fact intrinsically linked? How do I know? Because the poets themselves said that they are, through the literary version of Casualties of War. Check this out. Remember that the Cavaliers, in the initial battle upon entering the town of Colchester, lost approximately 40 men. The actual recorded number is 32. But rounded up to the nearest score, not 10, is 40. In the first ever published version, there were a total of 160 men involved. Then, the second version, published 6 years later, did not deal with a number of men at all, but gave us insight on who these men were, the Cavaliers. But here's where things get interesting again. In this version from 1810, the total number of men involved is now 120, stating that there was a loss of 40, the same rounded-off amount as the Cavaliers lost in the battle. And in the final poem, we once again see the total number of men involved further reduced by a factor of, you guessed it, 40, now down to a total of 80 men. And there it is. History is made and the mystique about Humpty Dumpty is finally solved. And the 4 poems that substantiate the details of fact and folklore or almost lost, like the legend of the cannon they chronicle. In summary, Humpty Dumpty sat high on a tower, tasked with keeping his sovereign in power. Royalists hid behind walls to quench one man's thirst and die for the glory of King Charles I. Somewhat as large and as tall and as wide was one-eyed Jack Thompson by old Humpty's side. Aiming his cannon with deadly precision, they made widows and cripples with its ammunition. Day after day, the two would still stand until Roundhead soldiers came up with a plan. Send word to London about the new missions. To nix all who stand guard from their strategic positions. Cannons emerged, and did they compete, dispatching large mortar at hundreds more feet, with a thud and a crack of hot cannon fire. Humpty Dumpty and Jack would therein retire. Colchester's walls were soon penetrated. Colchester's people were in turn liberated. Be it of legend or historical fact, these poems are an ode to a cannon and Jack.